Something lives in my vents, and it's following me. Growing up, I had a very normal life. However, this all changed when I moved houses in the 7th grade. After that, everything went downhill. At first, everything was seemingly normal. Sure, I was nervous about leaving my old friends behind, but I figured it wouldn't be hard to make new ones, as I was a very social kid. The house itself was beautiful. Sure, it was old, but nothing out of the ordinary. My parents were excited, as was I, until we stepped inside the house. I remember feeling a chill on the back of my neck. I looked up and noticed there was a vent beside me. I laughed it off, figuring it was just the air conditioner as it was summertime. I remember walking down the narrow hallway. To the right was a bathroom, and to the left, the laundry room. At the end of the hallway was my new bedroom. Once I opened the door, something felt off. It was as if the air had dropped at least 15 degrees. What struck me most, however, was the vent. It was placed high up, almost too high up, as it was out of place. There wasn't anything out of ordinary about it, but something just didn't feel right. I brushed it off and started unpacking. Once I was somewhat done, it was already almost midnight. I figured I should probably get some sleep, as I wanted to explore the town in the morning. I fell asleep with little to no trouble. Suddenly, I woke up and checked the timer. It was 3:30 a.m. on the dot. I sighed and tried to roll over. I couldn't move. Suddenly, I heard a noise. I looked up at where the noise was. It was coming from the vents. Suddenly, I noticed a red glow coming from inside of it. My breathing quickened as I tried to move. A few minutes later, I was finally able to move and the glow disappeared. I jumped out of bed and turned the dot lights on. I figured it must have been an animal and I would have my father check it out in the morning. The night went by slowly. I watched the sun rise and heard my parents get out of bed. I left my room and met my mother making breakfast. I told her about what I had saw and she assured me it was likely a small animal or my imagination. I laughed it off and walked around town for a bit. I met some kids who were also living in my neighborhood. When I told them where I lived, I remember the shocked look on their faces. They told me that the last family there had been brutally murdered, and nobody could find out who did it. They said that their bodies looked like they had been mauled by a wild animal. I figured they were just messing with me, so I left the subject alone. The looks on their faces, however, made me feel like there was some sort of truth to it. Once the sun went down, I walked home. I saw a note on the kitchen counter that was signed by my parents. The note said they went out to dinner. This wasn't out of the usual, so I shrugged it off. I took my shoes off and went to my room. I climbed into bed and tried to relax, but the silence around me felt oppressive, like the walls themselves were closing in. My eyes kept flicking up to the vent in the corner of my room. It seemed so ordinary, but I couldn't ignore the way it made my skin crawl. The red glow from the previous night was still vivid in my memory. My heart thudded in my chest as I lay in the dark, listening. The house creaked and groaned as if it had a life of its own. I kept waiting for the sound I dreaded, the sound from the vents that came, a soft scratching noise, the kind that almost made you think you were imagining it, but not quite. My body went rigid as I turned toward the vent. The scratching was slow at first, almost methodical, and then a faint tapping followed. Tap, tap, tap. The noise seemed to move across the ceiling and then down the wall toward me. I felt my heartbeat in my throat as I stared at the vent. I didn't want to move, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. A cold wind brushed across my face, though I couldn't understand where it came from. The temperature in the room dropped, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The scraping noise grew louder, then stopped. My breath caught as I heard something else, a whisper. It was so faint that I almost missed it. Come closer. My blood ran cold. It was a voice, but it wasn't my own, and it wasn't from the house. I could feel it in my bones, deep in my gut. It came from the vent, from inside the walls. I tried to move, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. The whisper continued, now louder, clearer. We're waiting. I finally snapped back into reality. My limbs no longer frozen. I jumped out of bed, scrambling to grab the nearest thing. A baseball bat I'd left by the door for protection. Though I had no idea why I thought it would help. The whispering stopped, but the feeling of being watched intensified. My skin crawled with the sensation of something creeping just out of sight. Something not human. I ran to my parents' room, but it was empty. The bed was made, the room as still as the rest of the house. Their absence sent a chill through me. I just hoped they would be back soon. The scratching resumed louder now, as if something, or someone, was crawling through the ducts above me. I bolted downstairs, the house feeling colder with each step. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air growing heavier. I reached the kitchen, but there was no sign of them. I checked the back door to make sure they hadn't left in a hurry, but it was locked from the inside. Then, I heard it. A loud bang. It was like something heavy slamming against the walls. It came from upstairs. I froze. Something was in the house with me. I ran back up to my room, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear over the frantic rush of my footsteps. The vent was vibrating now, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching in horror as the metal slats of the vent began to creak open. The growl came next. It was low, almost animal-like. And then, the voice, it spoke again, louder this time, unmistakable. Come here. I felt a wave of terror rush over me. This wasn't just a prank or my imagination. There was something living in the vents, something that had been here long before I arrived, something old, dark, and hungry. In a panic, I ran from the room, tearing down the stairs, but the house seemed to shift around me. The hallway stretched longer and longer as if the walls were moving with each step. I slammed into the front door, but it wouldn't budge. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys. The scratching intensified behind me. Whatever was in those walls was close, too close. I could hear the growls now, almost like breathing, heavy and strained. I turned to see the hallway. There was nothing there. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My only instinct was to escape. With a burst of adrenaline, I finally threw open the door and ran out into the night. The chill air hit me like a slap in the face, but it did little to ease the terror that gripped me. The street was empty, silent. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark and vacant. Suddenly, I woke up in a white room. My parents were standing above me with worried looks. "Mom, Dad, what happened?" I asked. "Sweetie, my mother responded, almost hesitant. "We found you clawing at your skin in the middle of the woods. We think it's best if you stay here for a little while." I stayed at the hospital for weeks. The doctors said I was delusional, psychotic even. I knew what really happened. I wasn't shocked when they came in and told me my parents had been murdered. I tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. If they would have listened, they still would have been alive today. I'm typing this out as I just got released. I don't achieve much time now. I think the thing that lived in the vents followed me. I think it's mad that I escaped. I hear it above me, getting closer. It wants revenge.